Hi, my name is Wei-Yang, and today I'll be presenting on the best practices in Cumulative Effects Assessment. Cumulative Effects Assessment, or CEA for short, is an indispensable part of environmental conservation. However, its utility has hitherto been underappreciated, and requirements for CEA are often found as a passing remark as part of environmental assessment legislation at the project level. This typically entails a subsection requiring a project proponent to consider the cumulative effects of a project. My aim is to contribute to the discussion by consolidating the best practices in CEA, as well as recommendations by leading academics in the field. I shall begin by providing an outline of the deficiencies of environmental assessment in Part 1, and with Part 2 being a primer on CEAs. Part 3 provides a survey of the practice of CEA in various jurisdictions and highlights the shortcomings and failures. Part 4 consolidates the suggested areas for reform advocated by academics, as well as good practices identified in any jurisdiction. To understand why CEA is necessary, we must begin with outlining the current prevalent method of environmental assessment, which is the Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA for short. An EIA is the process of identifying the future consequences of a current or proposed action on the biophysical environment with the view of contributing to environmentally sound and sustainable development. In many jurisdictions, this is required as part of the regulatory process, where the proponent of certain kinds of projects have to conduct an EIA before it can obtain a permit to go ahead with it. However, the concept of the EIA fails to consider that the conservation of a biophysical environment requires more than just the assessment of a single project, but necessitates a consideration of the total effects of all the stresses on the given environment. And this is where CEA steps in. So allow me to first explain what cumulative effects are before going on to what CEA is. Cumulative effects may be defined as the impact on the environment that results from the incremental impact of the action under review when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. There are at least 12 forms of cumulative effects, of three of which I will go through in detail. The first is time crowding, which refers to the frequent, repetitive, and simultaneous impacts on an environmental resource, such as incremental noise from a number of separate projects. The second is cross-boundary movement, which refers to impacts that occur some distance away from the source, such as the long-range transport of air pollutants. Thirdly, we have synergistic effects resulting from multiple sources of impacts, which may be different in nature from the individual impacts, such as where oxides of sulfur and nitrogen combine to form smog. So having established what cumulative effects are, or CEs for short, we can go on to consider what a CEA is. A CEA is a systematic procedure for identifying and evaluating the significance of the various types of cumulative effects on the environment. As the definition suggests, unlike the EIA, which assesses and aims to mitigate the effects of a single project, the focus of a CEA is on the receiving environment. The key performance indicator of the effectiveness of a CEA is its ability to preserve, protect, and if possible to improve the quality of the receptor. There are 4 steps to CEA. First, the target environment is first identified in a process known as scoping. Next, all human activities, whether past, present, or future, that have affected or will affect the target environment must next be identified. Third, the significance between each activity identified in Step 2 and its effect on the environment must then be considered and analyzed to see whether the impacts of the various activities are additive, antagonistic, or synergistic. Finally, with this information, the relevant party conducting the CEA can then develop ways to manage the cumulative effects. For this paper, I looked at legislation from 4 different jurisdictions that at least mentions or alludes to cumulative effects, and I've put the relevant legislation on the screen. It is not quite necessary for me to go into detail for each jurisdiction because they operate in rather similar fashion. The provisions cited, which I produced, mainly deal with what factors a project proponent must take into account when conducting an EIA. and cumulative effects are just one such factor. With this general legislative framework in mind, we can go on to consider the commonly discernible problems. The first and most obvious problem is the insufficient attention paid to SEER despite existing legislative requirements. A report by Hyder in 1999 revealed that the comprehensive consideration of cumulative impacts remains scarce in the EU. Even when such impacts were mentioned in an EIA, they were not considered in much detail. While the research may be rather dated, more recent literature suggests that not much has changed. In Swedish and Italian EIAs, or EAs, cumulative impacts are still rarely described or included. Likewise, in the UK, a survey of 50 EIAs conducted revealed that only 24 of them mentioned cumulative effects or impacts. Even then, the majority of those which raised the issue failed to address them thoroughly. 10 of them mentioned cumulative effects in their introductions without further mention, and 6 identified cumulative effects but failed to provide any analysis. A similar pattern is observed in the USA. The second problem is the idea that SEERs are conducted as part of project-level EIAs. As alluded to earlier, the focus of a SEER is the effect of the full array of human activities on the receiving environment. On the other hand, EIAs focus on the environmental impact of an individual project on the environment. Since in many jurisdictions EIAs are conducted as part of the regulatory and permitting process, the EIA can become merely another hurdle for the project owner to cross before it can get approval from the relevant authorities. Such a mindset translates to project proponents minimizing efforts when it comes to SEER, particularly where the requirements and guidance for doing so are not explicitly clear. A third problem is that project proponents may not be able to conduct a proper SEER even if they wanted to, because of the lack of information available. It is trite that a comprehensive SEER relies on the availability of data, which may include sensitive or confidential information on existing or prospective projects from business competitors. They may not be readily available. Where the SEER is conducted by a government agency, a low level of coordination and sharing of resources between governmental agencies will be a hindrance, as well leading to fragmentation, inconsistency, and limited data access. The shortcomings of the practice of SEER have not gone unnoticed by academics and practitioners who have put forward several recommendations on how the process might be improved. Strictly speaking, not all of these suggestions for reform are legal reforms. However, this paper aims to engage both legal and non-legal aspects of SEER and possible avenues for reform because they are inextricably intertwined. The first and most commonly heard recommendation is that SEER should be conducted at a regional level instead of having a project-specific focus. By this, I refer to an area that is ecologically meaningful, such as watersheds and ecoregions, instead of areas divided according to administrative boundaries, since it would be artificial to divorce one part of an ecosystem from another. Not only does the broader spatial scale that a regional SEER affords also afford a realistic mechanism to assess sustainable development of the environment, the idea is that when impact assessment practitioners are called upon to mobilize the best science they can to support a regional SEER, the result is often far superior methodologically to what passes for SEER in most project EIAs. Secondly, it has been suggested that governments should assume the primary responsibility for managing cumulative effects. Such an arrangement will allow for more comprehensive land use planning and/or integrated resource management, which will in turn provide the ideal context for implementing SEERs. No doubt, a strong commitment to SEER requires an independent oversight agency or consortium with the sole responsibility to lead SEER and to implement and enforce the necessary science, monitoring, and planning programs to support it over the long term. To this end, there have been several government-led SEER initiatives in Canada's Northern Territories, which may be valuable for us to consider. The first is the Northwest Territories, in which there is the Northwest Territories Cumulative Impact Management Program, or the CIMP for short. The CIMP adopts a community-based approach to its work, which brings together northern residents, co-management boards, government industries, non-government organizations, and scientists to work together to collect, analyze, and communicate traditional knowledge and scientific monitoring information on topics of high priority to the community. It will also plug gaps in information available about the environment, in particular, data regarding past developments and disturbances that will be relevant to regulators and planning authorities, such as previously unavailable data on natural disturbances like wildfires, landslides, and thaw slumping. It will also include data on human development and activity, such as contaminated sites, quarries, and parks. The data collected by the CIMP will also be made available to the public online. A second initiative is the Nunavut General Monitoring Program, or the NGMP for short. The NGMP is substantially similar to the CIMP and collects, analyzes, and reports information on the long-term conditions of Nunavut's environment, people, communities, and economy. Like the CIMP, a key premise of the NGMP is community-based collaboration, and this may be seen and manifest in projects such as the Hudson Strait Marine Bird Coastal Monitoring Survey, which involves Inuit communities and their elders working alongside Western scientists to incorporate and document traditional Inuit ecological knowledge as a key component of monitoring research. The NGMP also aims to fill key knowledge gaps and make the collected environmental monitoring information available online. A summary of the knowledge report will be produced periodically. Finally, we have the suggestion to improve participation, and this is the third recommendation is the suggestion to improve access to information, and this is perhaps the main area in which legal reform is required. Information is essential to inspiring critical thinking and sound dialogue in the CEA process. As mentioned earlier, the conduct of CEA may require business-sensitive information from ongoing or prospective projects, which private entities may not hand over readily. It is therefore imperative to improve the access to such information for institutions that conduct CEA. One possible way to do this is to legislate disclosure requirements for private entities with regard to any information that will be necessary for the CEA. This is perhaps another reason for CEA to be done at a regional level by the government instead of at a project level by private proponents. It would be uncomfortable from a business and commercial perspective, for one private company to owe disclosure obligations to another private company, for the obvious fear that the provision of such information may be abused. Even then, it will be rather cumbersome in the event that one company has to disclose information to multiple project proponents. The last suggestion for improvement relates to improving participation. The involvement of a broad range of interested individuals and groups facilitates mutual learning, which in turn aids the process of identifying social values while affording the opportunity for all actors to understand the value placed on the target environment in light of local and or traditional knowledge. One good example of this in practice is the establishment of the Satu Land Use Working Group in Canada, which is set up to study and collaboratively develop a cumulative effects management strategy in Canada's Northwest Territories. It aims to be a collaborative forum through which to discuss, study, and resolve key regional land use issues, and will consist of equal representation from Aboriginal organizations and from government, regulators, industry, and environmental organizations. In conclusion, this paper has examined the current legislative framework and practice of CEA across several international jurisdictions and has found them wanting. Having identified the common criticisms of CEA at a structural level, it has also put forward several recommendations that environmental assessment practitioners and lawmakers can and should consider. However, these recommendations depend very much on the willingness of today's government to invest in its environment. The ongoing nature of the SEER process makes it a costly exercise that may be unsustainable without government support or funding. As such, just advocates of SEER must be prepared to rally support for it, given the current social, cultural, and political realities. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much.